Mr Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I believe it was the Honourable Member for Christchurch who, at an earlier hearing, described this bill as a rat protection bill. And were it to be one, I certainly wouldn't be supporting it, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I grew up in an old farmhouse, and some of my most profound memories of childhood involve rodents, and not in a particularly positive way. I remember lying in bed in that seemingly interminable period between being put down as a relatively small child and actually falling asleep, hearing the little scurrying of I hope they were mice, but we were always not quite sure whether it was the mice or the rats that had the upper hand at that stage. And they'd go up the wall, and then you'd hear them pitter-patter across the ceiling. And I suppose because I was used to it from a very early age, it became rather soothing after a while, which seems odd in retrospect. And then we had, in our kitchen, for quite a period, there was a mouse that became very, very bold. Normally, they're nocturnal animals, but there's one particular one that lived behind the gap where there should have been, I think, a washing machine, dishwasher. And it took to coming out in the kitchen whilst we were having our breakfast, and it would just wander across the floor. And I'm sorry to say, whilst it was rather a sweet little mouse, and we did not take effective action for a week or two. My mother eventually did decide that hygiene was the better part of that relationship, and I'm not quite sure. I'm sure she didn't use a glue trap, heaven forbid, but an effective means was found to say goodbye. And then finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mentioned earlier that there was a contest between the ascendancy of the mice or the ascendancy of the rats. And it may be an urban myth, but I've always assumed that you only had one in a house. You either had mice or you had rats. I stand to be corrected on that. But I do remember my brother in a rat hunt in the larder with a baseball bat, and he effected a clean hit on a moving target in our larder. And that gave him enormous status, certainly in my eyes, and I've looked up to him ever since.
On that beautiful story that you're telling us as it growing up in the countryside, which I would like to see and read more of in his future memoirs. I may have sleepless nights tonight because to say the ascendancy of the rats sounds like a new horror film. And so I am concerned that perhaps baseball bats might be something that we should look at banning with regard to rodents as well.
Well, I think that the Honourable Member for her intervention. The one thing to be said for baseball bats as a method of control of rodents is it may not be very effective, and it's pretty rare that you make contact, but when you do, it's decisive. So the reason why I reminisce, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because we do need to control rats, and we do need to control rodents. But when we do, we share this world. And growing up in the kind of childhood I had, I instinctively understood how much we share this world with wildlife, and I benefited enormously from it. And so when we do need to control animals, particularly really sophisticated animals like mice and rats, then we need to do it quickly and we need to do it humanely. And so I do support this bill almost in its entirety. But I'm running the risk of sounding a bit like a lawyer this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I made a rather tedious intervention in the previous bill, and I'm afraid I'm going to do it again, because I made this point in second reading, and then I was punished by being put on the Bill Committee as well, where I took the opportunity of making the same point during the committee stage, and it received cross-party support and agreement that there was an issue that needed to be addressed. And I refer, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, to Clause 1.5, because this bill has the effect of outlawing the laying of glue traps, but not entirely. So if you are a licensed operator, it is still perfectly legal to lay glue traps in certain circumstances. And yet, I should perhaps start with Clause 1.4, which says that a person who knowingly causes or permits an offence to be committed under subsection 1 or 2 commits an offence. So that has in its mind people who perhaps pay someone else to come and lay a glue trap on their behalf. But then clause 1.5 says a person commits an offence if the person A finds a glue trap in England that has been set in a manner which gives rise to a risk that a rodent will become caught in the glue trap, and B, without reasonable excuse, fails to ensure that the glue trap no longer gives rise to such a risk. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this clause relates to the passer-by. And it's in that context that I have significant concerns about the current drafting, because it requires legal knowledge of a bystander. Because you need to know what the legal requirements are for the setting of glue traps. As a perfectly innocent bystander or passer-by, you see a glue trap in any situation, and you have to identify, first of all, that that is illegal. That's your job. You then have to identify whether or not it's a licensed one. So either it's going to put the passer-by at risk of prosecution, of committing an offence, or it's going to be a terrible nuisance to licensed operators who are legally laying glue traps, legally because there is a specific need, for whatever reason, to have a glue trap in that situation, and they're being removed. The passer-by is throwing themselves upon these glue traps to disable them. So I'm concerned that the draft still has not taken account of this genuine concern.
My honourable friend,
Yeah.
I thank him for giving way on that point, and I also thank him for enduring the ordeal of serving on the Bill Committee, which he made very valuable contributions to. I can understand his concerns around these clauses, but I do think it is absolutely crucial that we close loopholes, and I think the defence, I don't think a member of the public could be expected, and I think it would provide a reasonable excuse, because a glue trap essentially is a piece of cardboard that doesn't really be recognisable as something very harmful. But I think the intention is to cover, a pub landlord might ask a pest controller to put them down, and then, he would be liable. He could claim that it wasn't me, and so I can't be prosecuted. So I thank him for his intervention.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention. Actually, the example that the Honourable Lady gives would be caught by clause 1.4. The additional concern that I have about clause 1.5 is subclause B, because in that subclause it has the seeming effect, Madam Deputy Speaker, of reversing the burden of proof, because it's for the defendant, the innocent passer-by, has to prove that they had reasonable excuse. Now, I would be very grateful if the Minister, when in her comments, concluding comments, could just address that particular point to reassure me and other members of the House that we don't inadvertently create some unintended consequences whilst continuing to support what is, without doubt, a very useful and much needed amendment to our legislation.